scientists are finally revealing the DNA evidence they say helped solve one of history's biggest crime mysteries, the identity of Jack the Ripper.
For more than 100 years, people have wondered who Jack the Ripper really was. Now, artificial intelligence has stepped in, looking at old evidence with new eyes, and what it found is worse than we thought. Was Aaron Kosminski the culprit, or were there others involved? Join us as we uncover why this new twist no one saw coming. London's Autumn of Fear. In the autumn of 1888, the East End of London carried an atmosphere heavy with struggle. Whitechapel was crowded with narrow alleys, small houses, and lodging rooms that were often filled with people who had nowhere else to go. The streets smelled of smoke, cheap gin, and poverty. Thousands of men and women lived close together in these conditions, yet survival was uncertain. Many worked long hours for little pay, and others turned to desperate means just to find food or a bed for the night. At the heart of this struggle, fear was about to settle in, and it would leave a mark on history that has never been forgotten. Life in Whitechapel was already harsh. Families shared single rooms, while others lived in lodging houses where strangers slept side by side. Crime was common, illness spread easily, and the people who lived there often felt abandoned by the wealthier parts of London. It was in this place, during the chill of late summer and autumn, that a series of assassins began, ones so brutal that they shook not only Whitechapel, but the entire city. The victims were women who lived difficult lives, many turning to prostitution to survive. They are remembered today as the 5 canonical victims, though at the time they were often overlooked by society. Mary Ann Nichols was the first, found on August 31, 1888. Just a week later, on September 8th, Annie Chapman's body was discovered in Hanbury Street. On September 30, 2 more women were assassinated on the same night. Elizabeth Stride's life ended on Berner Street, and within an hour, Catherine Eddowes was assassinated in Mitre Square. The 5th victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was found on November 9 in her small room on Dorset Street. What set these assassinators apart was not only the number, but also the manner in which they were carried out. The culprit displayed a kind of precision that suggested knowledge of anatomy. Throats were cut, bodies were mutilated, and in some cases, organs were removed. It was not only violent, but seemed ritualistic, as though the assassinator wanted to send a message through the horror left behind. This detail drew the attention of doctors, police, and eventually the entire press, who began to realize that a single person might be responsible. As the bodies were found, the streets of Whitechapel became filled with fear. People who once walked at night in search of food or work now hesitated to leave their homes after dark. Women felt unsafe, especially those who had to earn money through street work. Police patrols increased. Detectives tried to piece together clues, and suspects were questioned. But the assassination continued. The feeling that a predator was moving through the shadows spread quickly, and ordinary life seemed frozen by dread. The newspapers of the time gave the crimes wide coverage. The press created headlines that drew people's attention not only in London, but across the world. It was during this period that the name Jack the Ripper first appeared, supposedly from a letter sent to the police and press. Whether the letter was genuine or a hoax remains debated, but the name stuck. From then on, the assassinator became a legend, a shadowy figure that symbolized both mystery and terror. Stories spread about his identity, his methods, and his motives. Readers were gripped by every new report, and the assassination turned into one of the first true media-driven crime stories. The fear was not only about the crimes themselves, but also about what they represented. Whitechapel became seen as a place of danger, lawlessness, and misery. The case exposed the deep divide between rich and poor in London. While the East End lived in desperation, wealthier Londoners followed the case almost like a grim story, demanding that the police find answers but rarely addressing the social conditions that left women so vulnerable in the first place. Then, just as suddenly as they began, the assassination stopped. After Mary Jane Kelly's death in November 1888, no further cases matched the same pattern with the same certainty. The assassinator vanished into history, leaving behind questions that remain unsolved. Suspects were named, from local butchers and doctors to more unlikely figures, but none were ever proven guilty. The mystery deepened with every failed lead. The idea of Jack the Ripper became less about one person and more about a symbol of fear, brutality, and the failure of justice. However, these crimes were not only about blood and shadows, but also about whispers of who the assassinators might be. Each new theory deepened the mystery, drawing the city into a game of secrets where truth and fear blurred into one. Suspects in the shadows. The assassinations of Whitechapel in 1888 shocked not only London, but the entire world. Newspapers carried every detail of the crimes, and the public demanded answers. In response, the police and the press searched desperately for the face behind the name that haunted every headline: Jack the Ripper. The investigations of Victorian London quickly became a frenzy, with countless names suggested and rumors spreading like wildfire. The city was filled with whispers, and the sense of dread only deepened as more theories emerged, each darker than the one before. Victorian investigators worked under pressure like never before. They had limited technology, and the idea of forensic science was still at its earliest stage. Without modern tools, police relied on eyewitness accounts, local rumors, and circumstantial evidence. Because of this, nearly every strange man in Whitechapel came under suspicion. The streets swarmed with detectives, journalists, and fearful citizens, yet no one could point to a single face with certainty. Instead, dozens of names were thrown into the ring, creating a chaotic trail of suspicion. Among the earliest theories was that of Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher. He was well-educated, respected by his peers, and outwardly unremarkable. Yet, when his body was found in the Thames after he took his own life in December 1888, some believed he might have been the Ripper. The timing of his death, just weeks after the last canonical assassination, fueled suspicion. To those searching for closure, it was tempting to believe that the assassinator had ended his own life, bringing an end to the terror. Yet there was no evidence directly tying Druitt to the crimes, leaving only speculation. Another name that captured attention was Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American doctor. Known for his flamboyant personality and troubling past, he had been arrested in London for unrelated offenses during the period of the assassinations. His reputation for misogyny, combined with his sudden departure from England soon after the crimes, made him a strong suspect in the public eye. Still, his connection to the assassinations was never proven, and like many others, his name faded into the background of unsolved questions. But among all these swirling theories, one figure stood out more clearly in police files. His name appeared not only in gossip, but also in the confidential memos of Scotland Yard. His name was Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski was a Polish-Jewish immigrant who had come to London with his family. They lived in Whitechapel, in the very heart of the poverty and overcrowding where the assassination occurred. He worked as a barber, an ordinary man blending into the endless rows of struggling workers. Yet behind his quiet trade lay troubling behavior that caught the attention of both neighbors and police. Reports described him as unstable, prone to violent outbursts, and deeply hostile toward women. In a district already drowning in fear, his presence was unsettling. Scotland Yard documents later revealed that Kosminski was considered a prime suspect. Officials described him as mentally disturbed, possibly dangerous, and someone who fit the profile of the assassinator haunting Whitechapel. What troubled many historians is the fact that his name appeared in official reports, yet he was never prosecuted for the crimes. For reasons that remain uncertain, the police kept him under suspicion, but never took the decisive step of charging him. Eventually, Kosminski's mental health declined further. His condition grew worse, and he was admitted to an asylum. There, he spent the rest of his life, fading into obscurity as the years passed. He died in the institution, a forgotten figure in a city that had once whispered his name in fear. To some, this seemed like a tragic ending for a man who may have been innocent. To others, it felt like the quiet disappearance of the assassinator himself, removed from the streets, but never officially declared guilty. The mystery deepens when looking at why the police never acted more strongly against him. If they suspected Kosminski, why was he not stopped? Some believe that evidence was too weak, with only rumors and circumstantial details pointing his way. Others suggest that the police might have feared inflaming anti-immigrant and anti-Jewish sentiment in Whitechapel if they arrested him without absolute proof. London at that time was a city divided, and tensions ran high against immigrant communities. Accusing Kosminski without clear evidence could have sparked riots and worsened the fragile order of the East End. The unanswered question lingers. Was Aaron Kosminski truly Jack the Ripper, or was he simply a troubled man caught in the storm of suspicion? Modern studies have tried to shed light on the matter, with some researchers pointing to later claims that physical evidence linked him to the assassinators. Yet, even with these findings, doubts remain. The truth is blurred between history and legend, just as it was in 1888. What is certain is that the investigations of Victorian London created more questions than answers. The frenzy of names, the desperation of police, and the eager hunger of the press built a legend that has lasted for generations. Suspects like Druitt and Tumble Tea fueled the imagination, while Kosminski's story gave the case a haunting human face. He was not a shadowy figure from the outside world, but a man who lived in the very streets where the women of Whitechapel fought for survival. But recently, one object has drawn more curiosity than most. A shawl, stained and silent, may hold the secrets Jack the Ripper never meant to leave behind. And with AI, its whispers are finally being heard. The shawl and the breakthrough of AI. In 2007, a dark blue flower-patterned shawl once linked to Catherine Eddowes came back into the spotlight. Catherine was one of the 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper, assassinated on a chilling September night in 1888. The shawl, held in private collections for generations, was bought at auction by businessman and Ripper enthusiast Russell Edwards. He believed it was more than just an old textile. To him, it was a time capsule, carrying evidence that could close one of history's most enduring mysteries. The cloth was said to have been found at the crime scene near Eddowes' body. For years, the shawl had lingered in obscurity, dismissed as a curiosity. But Edwards was determined. He saw in it the chance for science to succeed, where countless detectives, historians, and criminologists had failed. Laboratory tests followed. Specialists examined the fabric and detected traces of both blood and semen. Using modern forensic techniques, genetic material was extracted and compared to living descendants of both Catherine Eddowes and Aaron Kosminski. In 2014, Initial results seemed groundbreaking. Analysts claimed the DNA on the shawl matched the maternal line of Kosminski. For many, this was the first moment where whispers of guilt turned into scientific confirmation. Media headlines flared with excitement, describing the case as solved. The shadow of the Whitechapel assassinations appeared to finally have a name. But triumph was short-lived. Doubts arrived almost immediately. Critics pointed out that the shawl's history was unclear, its preservation questionable, and contamination likely over so many years. The findings, they argued, did not follow the strict peer review process required for solid science. Some even claimed the DNA evidence was overstated. Between 2014 and 2019, further work was published in academic journals, reinforcing the idea that Kosminski's genetic profile lingered on the shawl. Experts in forensic methodology argued that errors could easily creep into samples over a century old. Others suggested the presence of multiple contributors, raising the possibility that results were being over-interpreted. The shawl sat at the center of both promise and controversy. As time marched forward, the case once again seemed destined to remain an open wound in criminal history. But then, in 2025, technology took a bold leap. Artificial intelligence, newly refined for forensic science, was turned toward mystery. Instead of looking at one piece of evidence in isolation, this new system was designed to weave together strands of data across centuries. For the first time, Catherine Eddowes' shawl was not studied alone. The AI platform integrated DNA analysis from the cloth with eyewitness testimony, asylum records, newspaper archives, and even behavioral patterns derived from crime scene reconstructions. The AI reaffirmed what earlier tests had suggested. The genetic profile on the shawl aligned strongly with Aaron Kosminski's maternal DNA. In other words, the connection between the barber of Whitechapel and one of the Ripper's victims seemed undeniable when viewed in this broad, multi-layered framework. As the AI sifted through data, it noticed subtle differences in the attack patterns. Some crimes showed a ritualistic precision, almost surgical in nature, while others bore marks of chaotic violence. The testimonies from witnesses, once dismissed as unreliable, began to show patterns when reanalyzed. Descriptions of suspects varied not just in detail, but in build, clothing, and demeanor. The conclusion was chilling. The assassinations, long assumed to be the work of one hand, might have been committed by more than one person. Jack the Ripper, the singular phantom who terrified London, could have been a myth shaped by overlapping assassinators whose crimes blurred together in the fog of fear. This shockwave reframed the entire case. If Kosminski's DNA tied him to the crime scene, he may have been responsible for at least some of the assassinations, but the AI suggested he might not have been alone. The notion of a single calculating assassinator gave way to a darker possibility. Whitechapel's terror was not the act of one monster, but a storm of violence fed by the desperation, poverty, and brutality of 1888 London. Forensic historians revisited asylum reports. Kosminski had been described in Scotland Yard memos as unstable and violent, with a known hatred of women. His confinement to an asylum after the assassinations aligned with the sudden disappearance of the crimes. Yet the AI highlighted moments where the timing did not match perfectly, where another hand could have carried on the slaughter while Kosminski was incapacitated. The story of the shawl, once thought of as a final answer, now became a symbol of complexity. AI did not deliver a clean confession from beyond the grave, but it reshaped understanding. By blending DNA, witness accounts, and historical context, it created the clearest picture yet of London's autumn of fear. For the families of the victims, it was bittersweet. Catherine Eddowes, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Mary Jane Kelly had long been reduced to footnotes in the story of the Ripper. Science versus belief. The world of Jack the Ripper has always been one of shadows, suspicion, and endless debate. But in recent years, science has pushed its way into the story with new energy, and with it, belief has been challenged like never before. What once belonged to dark alleys, old police files, and whispered tales is now being examined through microscopes, DNA machines, and artificial intelligence. The result has been a storm of questions that no one can easily escape. The heart of the debate begins with forensic science. For years, a stained shawl linked to one of the victims, Catherine Eddowes, has been held up as a possible piece of evidence. Researchers claimed that traces of mitochondrial DNA found on the cloth matched descendants of Aaron Kosminski's family line. To many, this looked like the closest science had ever come to solving the mystery. But very quickly, experts raised doubts. Mitochondrial DNA can show a link to a family, but it cannot point to one single person with certainty. Entire groups of people can share the same pattern. That means that while Kosminski's family might connect, it could just as easily be another relative or even someone unrelated who shared the same genetic code. The science gave direction, but it could not give the final word. This problem became even more tangled when the chain of custody issue was raised. A piece of evidence is only as strong as its journey from the crime scene to the laboratory. For the shawl, that journey was broken, scattered, and uncertain. It had been passed down through private owners, shown in exhibitions, and touched by countless hands. Each step risked contamination, mixing new DNA with the old. Scientists who looked closely said that no test could ever truly separate what was original from what had been added over the years. For some, this meant the shawl could never be trusted. For others, it was still the best clue available, a thread that science should not let go of. Into this storm stepped artificial intelligence. For some, AI was the savior, a tool that could scan massive amounts of data, re-examine patterns, and even predict connections missed by humans. But others saw it as a suspect in its own right. AI only works with the data it is given. If that data is flawed, biased, or incomplete, the machine can still produce results with an air of certainty that might be misleading. When AI programs studied police files, witness reports, and forensic tests, they sometimes suggested that more than one assassinator might have been involved. To believers in the traditional story, this felt like rewriting history in a reckless way. Was AI clarifying the truth, or was it simply rearranging broken pieces into a picture that looked convincing, but was built on weakness? In 2025, the debate took on a new life when descendants of the victims spoke publicly. Families of women like Catherine Eddowes felt the pain and weight of history pressing on them. Some argued that the time had come for officials to recognize Aaron Kosminski as the true assassinator. To them, the evidence, though imperfect, lined up too strongly to ignore. They wanted closure, even if it came with questions attached. But not every family agreed. Some believed that the AI's suggestion of multiple assassinators was not only wrong, but also deeply offensive. For these families, belief was not just about science. It was about dignity, respect, and the way history remembers the dead. This tension spread far beyond families and experts. The media caught hold of the story and turned it into a global spectacle. Netflix announced new documentaries that promised to show the clash between old detective work and new technology. On social media, users argued late into the night, each post adding fuel to the fire. In London, the impact was even more direct. Whitechapel, once a neighborhood stained by horror, found itself reframed in the light of AI's shocking results. For tourists, it was an attraction. For locals, it was a reminder that the shadow of the Ripper had never truly left. The result of all these forces, science, belief, family voices, media attention, and tourism, was a debate that refused to end. Each side held onto its own version of truth. Science showed possibility, but also its own limits. Belief demanded recognition of dignity and history. AI stood between them, powerful and unsettling, offering answers but also raising new fears. What makes this moment so powerful is not that the mystery of Jack the Ripper is finally solved, but that it continues to grow. Each new tool, each new discovery, does not end the story. Instead, it pushes it into fresh directions. Mitochondrial DNA showed the promise of genetics, but also its boundaries. The shawl offered a link to the past, but also the dangers of contamination. AI revealed how technology can cut through noise, but also how it can create its own illusions. The media made the story global again, proving that even after more than a century, the Ripper's shadow still holds power over the imagination of millions. The world is left with questions rather than answers. Should Kosminski be named officially, or does that dishonor the uncertainty of the evidence? Should AI's claim of multiple assassinators be embraced, or is it a distortion of history? Can the shawl ever truly be trusted, or is it forever too tainted to matter? However, every mystery holds a choice. Do we chase the comfort of answers, or do we accept that some questions live on because they are meant to remain unsettled? With Jack the Ripper, that choice has become sharper than ever. The ethical trap. The shadow of Jack the Ripper has hung over London for well over a century. And yet today, science and artificial intelligence have breathed new life into the mystery. What was once a tale of foggy Whitechapel streets, desperate poverty, and brutal crimes is now a modern debate about truth, responsibility, and morality. As investigators, historians, and even descendants of the victims and suspects face new findings, one uncomfortable question remains. Are we ready to carry the weight of the answers we claim to want? If Aaron Kosminski, the Polish barber who lived in Whitechapel during the assassinations, is officially named as the Ripper, the consequences ripple far beyond the dusty pages of history. Kosminski suffered from severe mental illness, documented in asylum records of the time. To declare him guilty with evidence that might not withstand the standards of today's courts raises a troubling dilemma. Would this act give closure, or would it instead stigmatize a man whose struggles were never of his choosing? Naming him may brand his descendants forever with a legacy of horror, tying them to crimes they never committed but would be forced to carry by association. This leads to an even deeper moral question. Does justice still matter when the accused has been dead for more than a century? For Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly, and the other women who lost their lives, their memory deserves truth. But if that truth relies on fragile evidence, passed down through too many hands, can we call it justice, or are we merely shifting blame? A verdict without certainty risks building history on shaky ground, where belief outweighs proof. Yet the debate does not end with Kosminski. Artificial intelligence, tasked with analyzing old police records, press reports, and forensic data, has suggested something far more unsettling: the possibility of multiple assassinators. If true, this reframes one of history's most famous legends. The image of a single, shadowy figure slipping through London's alleys has shaped popular imagination for generations. But if more than one person was responsible, then the story is no longer about one man's cruelty, but about a society where violence thrived unchecked. This possibility shakes the very core of how the world remembers the Ripper. For over a century, his name has stood as a symbol of singular terror. To replace that with a more complex truth, that multiple assassinators may have walked those streets, removes the dark mythology and replaces it with something even harder to face. That the horrors of 1888 were not the work of one monster, but a reflection of a city where many could assassinate and vanish. Some argue that such a revelation dishonors history by erasing the neatness of the legend. Others see it as the truest reflection of a brutal time. And so the trap becomes clear. Do we want answers, or do we want the mystery? The Ripper story has endured not only because of the crimes, but because of the questions that never fade. Tours through Whitechapel, books, films, and endless debates all feed on that haunting uncertainty. The mystery's very power lies in the fact that it has no end. If science and AI strip that away, leaving behind only names and numbers, what remains of the legend that has fascinated generations? At the same time, ignoring new findings feels impossible. Families of the victims still exist, and their pain deserves respect. If technology offers them closure, should we deny it for the sake of keeping the mystery alive? The balance between truth and myth is fragile. Each revelation risks tipping the scales, either cementing history or unraveling it into doubt. The ethical trap of Jack the Ripper is not only about science, history, or justice. It is about humanity's hunger for certainty and our fear of what certainty costs. If Kosminski is confirmed, his name becomes forever tied to evil, and his descendants must live with shadows they never invited. If AI's findings of multiple assassinators are embraced, the story loses the sharp edge of its legend and becomes something messier, harder to retell, and more unsettling to accept. Perhaps the final question is the simplest. Do we really want the Ripper unmasked? Or is the mystery itself the very thing that keeps his story alive? For more than 100 years, the world has carried this puzzle, adding layers of science, technology, and speculation. But with every answer comes another burden. The true trap may not be in finding the truth, but in what happens when we finally decide what to do with it. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.